This paper aims at demonstrating the widespread use of equids at Karkemish during the late Iron Age. In particular, we try to understand how popular were these animals and if their presence left us tangible traces. To do so, the role of equids is analyzed through three main sources. Indeed, this paper integrates written sources with the new faunal and material evidence from the Turco-Italian expedition of the University of Bologna. Karkemish was one of the most important capital cities in the ancient Near East during both the Bronze and Iron Ages. Already attested in Ibla text, Karkemish later became seat of the Hittite viceroy and then of a local dynasty, which flourished until the Assyrians conquered the city at the end of the 8th century BC. The Babylonians eventually destroyed the Iron Age Karkemish at the end of the 7th century BC. Today, the site is located in southern Turkey. The border between Syria and Turkey crosses entirely the town, and the largest part of the outer town belongs to the Syrian territory. Karkemish was first explored at the beginning of the 19th century by a British museum expedition led by Leonard Bulley. This expedition was unfortunately interrupted by the outbreak of a series of international conflicts, which heavily affected the area and caused, from 1956, the progressive mining of a large territory on the border, including the site of Karkemish. The mining operations yielded by the Turkish government finally came to a conclusion in the Karkemish sector only in February 2011. During the same year, the joint Turco-Italian archaeological expedition under the direction of Nicola Marchetti from the University of Bologna, with Hassan Peker from the Istanbul University as deputy director, started again field activities at the site. Concerning faunal data from Karkemish, the systematic archaeological study of faunal assemblages from the excavation is based on a sample of about 10,000 osteological remains dated between the late Bronze Age I and the Iron IV, namely the Achaemenid period. The faunal assemblage was collected in different sectors of the site, including administrative, cultic, productive, residential, and funerary areas. To date, the archaeological studies are finalized only for area N, G, and A, the excavation of which is complete. Domestic animals were predominant in all periods, with sheep and goats that cover almost half of the number of identified specimens, followed by cattle and equids, while pigs, dogs, and camels are quite scarce. The late Bronze Age levels of Karkemish yielded a rather limited faunal assemblage. Most of the bones identified pertain to sheep and goats, or to small and medium ungulates. They are followed by in number by cattle and pigs, in a similar percentage, while the other domestic and wild species are scarce, mainly if compared with the Iron Age assemblage. Iron Age contexts are definitely better preserved. As a consequence, faunal remains are far more abundant in these levels. Sheep and goats are constantly the most represented group, but while pigs became very scarce, the occurrence of both bovids and equids increased. Equids are the third most frequented represented animal group in the Iron Age assemblage, with donkeys as twice as frequent as horses. If for some histological portion the determination of specimens was pretty easy, for many others the uncertainty remains obviously quite high to be confident enough to attribute a species. In fact, we identified also examples of crossbreeding, such as mules. The presence of wild equids is rare, but attested by the discovery of at least one partially articulated skeleton of Equus aemionus in an iron tree context of Area C. With regard to Equus asinus, you can see here a selection of osteological remains of a domestic donkey. These animals are mentioned in some written sources as the favorite beasts of burden, but they were definitely exploited also for food production. In fact, the majority of equid remains with evidence of butchering belongs to donkeys. Finally, considering the age of that and the scarcity of butchering traces, horses were instead not primarily exploited for food, but they were mainly used as workforce for ridden. We discovered several entire or partially connected horse skeletons, the determination of which is conferred by the occlusal aspect of teeth and by the size. According to iconographic and written sources, horses represented as status symbols, and they were used in warfare. They were killed mainly as adults, when their contribution as workforce became unprofitable. Indeed, the crucial importance of this animal during the Iron Age period is testified through the artistic repertoire, both in official and minor arts. On the one hand, in the Iron II period, horses are one of the most attested subjects in the Syro-Hittite relief sculpture, as testified, for instance, in the chariot slab from the long wall of sculpture of Karkemish. On the other hand, between the mid-8th and 7th century BC, we assist to the rise of a new massive choroplastic production. The British Museum expedition and the new Turco-Italian expedition at Karkemish discovered more than 800 clay figurines. The majority of these was harnessed horses, known as handmade Syrian horses and riders. It is currently believed that those terracottas were a lively expression of a socio-political changes occurred in the Middle Euphrates Valley under the Syrian hegemony. This assumption has been ascertained by the analysis of context where those figurines were retrieved. Apart from Karkemish, figurines of this type are tested just west of the Euphrates, and in particular, the Euphrates Bend seems to be the main production center. However, these figurines usually appear only in those sites with the strongest Syrian presence as a result of a prolonged control of some urban site centers. In other smaller sites, the Neo-Syrian invasion caused a social-economic impoverishment, and it is a matter of fact that no Iron Age clay figurine was there retrieved. If we look at context more closely, we can observe as these figurines are particularly found in funerary areas. The most well-known examples are the many cemeteries excavated by the British Museum at Karkemish and some neighboring sites. The common features shared by these cemeteries is that we are dealing with communal funerary areas located out of the town walls and exclusively devoted to the cremation practice. Nevertheless, fragmentary figurines are found in other types of funerary context. At Zingirli, for instance, 2 horse specimens were excavated in a 7th century wealthy domestic context, very close to a funerary chapel and within the home walls. More figurines were recovered at Saraja Oyuk and Zeytinli Baje Oyuk, from loose fields but very close again to inhumation burials, dating to the Neo-Syrian period. In particular, burials from Saraja Oyuk contain wealthy great goods, while at Zeytinli Baje Oyuk, we know about the presence of a sarcophagus including the human remains of a tall man with an iron blade. Another interesting type of context are wealthy domestic residences. These are typical multifunctional buildings diffused in Neo-Syrian provinces and usually pertaining to local people directly related to the Syrian agency. A very high percentage of figurines were in fact collected in filling layers from the Sargonid Palace of Karkemish. The same happened to a much similar structure at Tel Ahmar and the productive compound at Al Shukh Fakhani. At Zingirli, the just seen domestic structure from Area 5 pertained to the family of a certain Katamuwa, whose funerary inscription clearly states his connection both with the Neo-Syrian Empire and its Luvian origins. Thus, what stands out from the analysis of context is that clay figurines are mostly retrieved in wealthy domestic contexts, somehow to be connected with the Neo-Syrian provincial military system. The military character of this area is perhaps attested in a preserved grave from the Yunus cemetery. The Yunus cemetery is the main cemetery of Karkemish. Among the graves excavated by the Turco-Italian expedition, there is one exceptionally preserved, which includes 10 complete figurines. In this case, it seems relevant to detect a certain variety of portrait subject. Especially the horses could be divided in 3 main groups. 4 simple harnessed horses compose the major one. Then we have 3 horses with riders, and in the last group, we may identify 2 horses with young-looking features. An idea on the meaning of this differentiation might come from a comparison with a contemporary funerary custom. A recent study has been conducted on a group of real horses buried in some graves of the Pacific culture. This study has observed a correlation between costume complexity and a general trend upwards in age. In particular, the outfits were used to state the horse's social function, and this function was strictly connected to the age of the animal. This comparison, despite being far from a cultural point of view, suggests that probably the horse figurines from the Yunus grave show different types of useful animals, even though we absolutely cannot affirm their precise function apart from those with riders. If those figurines were representing some ideal male activities in an ironist society, it seems quite interesting to note that those activities follow those performed in the royal Neo-Syrian art. As a matter of fact, if we compare harnesses worn by horse clay figurines from Karkemish with the local official art, one might observe as these military costumes are practically identical with the wall paintings from the ancient Til Barsib that became called Shamanizer under the Assyrian hegemony. It is in fact with the provincialization of the Euphrates band that we assist to a complete Assyrianization of local costumes, consisting in a Baroque taste of dresses expressed through the abundant use of decorations and colors. Nevertheless, influences in local horse attires during the late Iron Age are a consequence of a long-term Assyrian territorial expansion. As widely known, Neo-Syrian royal annals inform us of tributes from Syro-Hittite kingdoms, in which horses, donkeys, and mules are a constant. The particular attention devoted to Equids from Assyrians is testified since the reign of Ashurnasirpal II. By carefully analyzing the context of these annals, one can observe how in the list of tributes offered to this king by some Syrian vassal towns, horses and related things are rarely offered, while those kind of tributes seem those interested by the Assyrians. These enlisted horses were not imported with the rest of the booty anyhow, but they were employed for new expedition westwards. When Assyrians settled out in the Euphrates region, approximately during the reign of Shalmaneser III, it seems reasonable to assume that parts of the local population were used as military personnel in order to guard frontiers of the Neo-Syrian Empire. The highly militarized society that characterized population living on the Euphrates is especially testified in local written sources dating to the 7th century BC. In a recently discovered inscription by Sargon from Karkemish, we know that this king reinforced the local army with 50 chariots and 200 horses. In the Tel Shuk Fahani written corpus, several military figures are mentioned as having close relationships with the Assyrian army. In particular, these figures are high-rank military personnel. Resuming, on the basis of astrological evidence, during the Iron Age period, Equids at Karkemish were the third most represented animal group in the local faunal assemblage. Domestic Equids include mainly horses, followed by donkeys and possible mules, while the presence of wild Equids is rare. Considering their age at death and the scarcity of butchering races, Equids were not primarily exploited for food, but were mainly used as beasts of burden. In the case of horses, in particular, these were also considered as status symbols, and they were used in warfare activities. This is especially true if we think that in the late 8th and 7th century BC, the cavalry took a new important role, replacing the chariot in order to strengthen the Neo-Assyrian military power. We could easily imagine that the cavalry became crucial in the success of the imperial program, and perhaps Luvian-Aramean populations would have been directly involved by means of their proper war-trained horses. Thank you.